Hello, I'm Amy and I facilitate the Ableton User Group in Central Victoria, Australia, where every single month we have a meetup for all of the people making electronic music or having an interest in electronic music, particularly those with Ableton Live at the centre of it, in all of the small towns dotted around Central Victoria here. We've been getting together online during COVID, not face to face, but it hasn't stopped us from having some absolutely incredible workshops with some super performers. And in this session from August 21st, 2020, our guest speaker was composer, sound artist, musician, academic lecturer, Dr. Anthony Lyons. And a little bit of background on Anthony. He is a composer for orchestra. He's done work for bands, electronic performance, installation, musical theatre, you name it. Also planetarium domes, all sorts of stuff. He draws his inspiration from popular music. He started in bands as a guitarist in pub bands and right through to art music traditions where he's composed for things like the MSO and others. Electronic and sampled elements are a very big part of Anthony's work. He's into loop-based stuff, drones, glitch, that kind of micro sound elements, those kind of things. And his interactive collaborations, audio-visual installation work have been exhibited internationally, so across Australia, Singapore, Germany, Portugal, UK, US, you name it. And he's also done some really interesting things like composing for the EMS Synthy 100, which is an incredible synthesizer. You should Google that one if you're not familiar with it. And he has performed that at the Melbourne Recital Centre. He's currently finishing his debut release for the Duo project that he does with a cellist, fabulous cellist called Emily Williams, and he plays the Buchla easel synthesizer in that duo. So that's another one to definitely Google if you haven't come across it before. So in this session, Anthony takes the group through integrating external hardware, synthesizers and controllers and that kind of thing with Ableton and the creative uses for that. So sending MIDI, receiving MIDI and audio and how to work with that and ways of thinking about that, as well as lots of the troubleshooting that comes with connecting control voltage with a digital interface and opportunities and to move into a live sense. So it's a really great session and I know that you're going to enjoy it. So sit back for the next hour. If you have any questions that come with it, jump into the community and leave a comment.
Start there and get something going kind of quite intuitively and then kind of think about, okay, this might become something and I need to record it into Ableton. And then I often, start doing things in Ableton as well, because there's certain things that you can do in Ableton, as you know, that, are harder to do with external gear. And all of a sudden it can get quite kind of complex. Well, it does for me in terms of, how do I kind of keep all this together? Particularly if what you're doing is pulse or beat based, if things need to be in time, how do you sync the internal and the external? So that's something I often kind of come up against. And there are a few ways to kind of deal with that, both sync as well as, I guess, kind of other sorts of information like pitch information and things like that. And there are a number of ways we can deal with this in Ableton. You've probably heard of things like Ableton Link, for example, which uses kind of Wi-Fi basically, or Ethernet, and you can kind of sync Ableton with other applications. So really kind of handy if you've got, I don't know, applications on an iPad or your phone, kind of mobile devices, and other, DAW applications as well are more and more kind of using Ableton Link. That just kind of sends what we call kind of clock information or tempo information and keeps devices in sync. But, kind of a lot of synthesizers, particularly kind of more vintage ones that are just kind of dealing with control voltage, haven't got, don't run on Link. So then there are these other things. The big one, I guess, is MIDI, which has been around for a long time. MIDI information. It just allows different, you know, it's a standardized protocol, I guess, that allows different devices to talk to each other, stay in sync or send note information, whatever it may be. It's been around since, I guess, 1983. It's been around a long time. It's one of the few things that in the world of music, people kind of agreed upon, and it's kind of stuck. So look, I was, and look, there's a third thing as well. Sorry, when we're talking about Ableton, and this is kind of more recent, there's this thing called CV tools. And this is kind of really handy if you've got kind of more, I suppose, kind of older or vintage synthesizers that are using control voltage. You know, and since before MIDI, that's how they still kind of, you know, they send voltages. So how do you kind of connect this kind of really contemporary world of Ableton, which is all digital, running on a digital kind of platform, with, you know, basically control voltage, which is how kind of older synthesizers worked. And look, we can do that too now. You know, if you've got a right kind of audio interface with Ableton, you can, you know, send, you know, Ableton will kind of convert information, whether it's timing information or pitch information, to control voltage. And if your interface allows it, you can kind of pipe that into your synth. But having said all that, I'm just going to try to kind of look at MIDI today for a few reasons. One, because we haven't got heaps of time, but also I realised in trying to kind of get a few things ready last night that trying to Zoom at the same time was a bit of a nightmare. Like, one, because I'm using the internet, so all of a sudden Ableton Link, virtual MIDI and these sorts of things, and even CV tools, I just couldn't get to work because instead of Zoom is going, you know, outputting through the internet through my machine, it's not even hitting my interface, so I can't use CV tools. But I'm going to maybe show you a few things with MIDI and how I guess you can kind of connect external devices with Ableton, with MIDI clock information and basic stuff like that. It's often, I guess, what I have to do one way or the other with my own stuff. So maybe I'll dive into it, and maybe as a way to kind of show this, I might show a piece I did a couple months ago, and I'll open up the Ableton session and maybe play a little bit to give you an idea, and just kind of talk you through how it kind of came together in terms of a combination of external hardware and inside the box working, and how I had to try to kind of get these two worlds to speak to each other. I'm going to just kind of, I've got another camera set up here through my iPad. I'm just going to check this works before I do all that. Okay, so you can probably see me here. Hello. I'm just kind of showing you around. So look, there's you and Ableton on my screen, and I've got a little kind of synth, external synth here. I control a keyboard, some kind of Eurorack stuff here. Here's my booklet easel, and over there is some modular stuff. So it's kind of a real, it's often how I work, is all these sorts of different things and trying to kind of connect them to Ableton. So I'm going to share my screen next. I can see there's a few things in the chat here. Clock sync, MIDI is also the basis for DMX. Yes, good. Okay, I'm sharing my screen. Share. Okay. Show the video panel. Okay, and here's a session of Ableton with a track. Yeah, like I said, I did this a few months ago, and it was released by this. I guess they're like a sound. What are they? Like a sound mapping label. They have lots of sorts of projects, and this, you know, was a piece. I think it's called Sounds of Lockdown, a compilation that was kind of released, and I had to work with a field recording initially, and turn it into something. And this session is kind of what I turned it into. You can see there's actually a lot of tracks going on here because I've grouped things together. That's when we if I undid all these groups, you'll start to see that there's a lot of tracks, iPads, another group here, which I haven't named. This isn't best practice, is it? Track 22 group, but, some things I've named. I was working to a deadline with this, so took some shortcuts. But there's, I don't know, if I go Moog synthesizers, I don't know, it's about 35 different tracks going on here, a combination of audio and MIDI. And I've these ones that look like they're in blue here. I've done this thing in Ableton called Frozen the Track, which applies all the plugins you've got set up on that track to affect it in different ways, and it kind of freezes it. So I've been trying to limit my CPU usage because I realized last night with Zoom going at the same time that, yeah, this was maxing out my computer. So we'll see what happens. I'll play you a bit of this. Before I do, here's a little bit of the sample I was working off. That's the actual track. Here's the sample. So basically, bells in this sounding in this Italian city of, I call it Piombino, which I'm probably pronouncing wrong, during lockdown, and that's pretty much all you hear. And somebody had caught 2 minutes of this on I guess like a little, a phone or a field recorder, and you hear a few seagulls, and that's basically it. And so the task was to make something of that, and this is kind of what I did with that. And I'll just play a bit of it to give you an idea, and this will let us know how Ableton's going and whether we're going to have any glitch outs here or not. And yeah, just give you a kind of a feel, and then I'll talk about some of the things kind of going on and get to trying to kind of sync things. Here we go. Okay, so that gives you kind of a little bit of a taste, I guess. So you can hear, like I've chopped up that, you know, the bell sound of that original sample and tried all these different things like reversing the sound and kind of doing all these kind of granular things. But what kind of underpins this and where this started was me playing around on the modular and with that kind of kick drum, you know, just on every kind of beat. And you can see that part here, creatively called kick. And you can see it's just kind of falling on every beat of the grid. And that kind of creates this kind of, for most of this piece, which if I played the whole thing would go for about 6 minutes, played you like the first third, but it kind of creates this kind of bedrock. And if I solo that, there it is. You're hearing all these kind of, you might be hearing all these little clicks, I don't know, with Zoom, kind of left and right. That's because I've got a little bit of a delay on it and a few, you know, a bit of processing, but it's essentially an analog kick coming from my modular system. Look at me over here. So this is where this started, and I had to quickly decide, you know, what's the master tempo here? And I made Ableton be the master tempo. You can see 100 here. And I sent information to the modular saying I want that kick to be at 100 beats per minute, you know, 4 to the floor. And all of a sudden, you know, I have to send that information to kind of keep the modular in time. And so I can get the information into Ableton and things work with what I do in Ableton at 100 BPM. Otherwise, it's kind of really hard. You know, I could have done things on the modular, recorded them in, like I've recorded this kick, but if I didn't have like a master clock source, then trying to kind of combine these worlds, especially with a piece like this, it's kind of atmospheric, I guess, but there's that kind of constant beat and there's these other polyrhythmic kind of rhythms going on around it. It'd get really messy really quickly. So that's the first thing I did. And the way I do it, I'm going to switch back to this other, what do we call it? We call it a video camera. This other camera here. Essentially, in Live, if you go to preferences, there's a whole section on what's happening with MIDI, MIDI ports. And mine looks quite complicated, partly because I've got a MIDI interface attached to my computer, and you know, just via USB. And Live has detected that, and it's essentially it's a 5-port MIDI device, and I can put 5 different channels in. That's where all these are showing up as icon cube or something, and the outputs I've got 5 channels. But I was just kind of using one of those channels. I've also got this thing here, UMIDI, and that, if I move this precariously over here and point to this, you probably can't see very clearly, but this is my UMIDI. It's like a MIDI interface. And what it does is convert Ableton's kind of clock information, which is set at 100 BPM up the top left here, to control voltage, because my modular runs on control voltage, not MIDI, and it lets it know what that tempo is, and that way I can kind of sync the two together. Yeah. A more contemporary synthesizer, perhaps, than my modular is, you know, for example, this Roland thing, which I can't get the camera in the right spot to show you. You know, like a digital version of a Roland 106 synthesizer. And you can see it's got MIDI ports, whoops, at the back here. And again, I can send clock information or other information to it to kind of play and from Ableton. So that's kind of what I do. In this particular track, I was using the modular mostly and stuff inside Ableton. You know, there's another track here. I'll solo this one now called Rings, which is just like a sequence information coming from my modular that gave me kind of pitch. In there, but you can see even with from the recording, the waveforms, there's the kick, and there was the, you know, the rings, kind of the pitch stuff happening. That if these are where the beats are falling, that the rings isn't happening as regularly, the pitch stuff, but it's in sync with the kick. Yeah, because again, I was sending the clock information from Ableton to the modular, and it was kind of keeping it in time. And then I was recording that modular stuff back into Ableton. So this sorts of kind of weird backwards and forwards things start to happen. Essentially, something's got to be your master tempo. It's either got to be Ableton, or it can be something outside of Ableton. And that's something you can do as well, particularly if you're performing, for example, and you don't want to trust Ableton's clock, which can be a bit what they call kind of jittery, because, you know, it's a computer and it's doing all these other tasks as well as running Ableton. Sometimes, you know, it'll for a, you know, a nanosecond drop its eyes off Ableton and do something else, which is enough time for the clock to get a bit out. So some people like to use external clocks. It could be they've got a, you know, a drum machine or something like that. And look, you could send that clock information to Ableton, and Ableton will slave to that clock. But I generally just kind of use Ableton as my master clock, and that's what I've done with this track. So essentially, it was quite important for me to, the foundation of this whole track is that kick drum, like I said, some of the bell sounds and that ring sound or the pitch stuff. So I'm just going to kind of, again, just kind of play you a little bit of that. I'm conscious that every time I move my screen, it's probably pixelating, so I'm trying not to move it too much, but play a little bit of this. So that's the foundation of the track, okay? Now, you can see here, here's one I might isolate, called, creatively again, tubular bells. And play this. Getting a kick still. That's pretty much all that layer does, but it's offset against the kick. I guess it's kind of what we call a polyrhythm. I'll play them together. So yeah, you can kind of hear that pushing and pulling. But I've input this to create that bell sound against the kick that I was just kind of playing here. This wasn't done in the modular or with an external instrument. This was done within Ableton. And you can see, you know, this is what MIDI information looks like in Ableton. Here is the pulse. And, you know, it's at a different rate to the kick. And if I zoom in, you can see there it is there. Across the top. I just so happen to be using Ableton if I click on this, move you away from this. Here's the sound here. I turn it off, it goes away. So that's, you know, a synth within Ableton, a digital synth, but the information is what's important. Now what I'm going to do, just as an experiment, is show you how I could use that same information recorded on this track, you know, which I've just kind of, you know, plugged in to Ableton. I could make that affect an external synth, which is what I hopefully will be able to do right now. So I'm going to copy that track, the MIDI information, and I'm going to paste it on this MIDI track below, and take that off solo, solo this. And then all of a sudden, in the land of MIDI, you know, I can send it somewhere. And I'm sending it to Arturia Key Step 32, which is like a MIDI controller. And now I'm going to go to this camera. And it's gone to sleep, great. Doesn't like it. All right, go back to the other camera. You'll just have to take my word for it. That there's a keyboard, MIDI controller keyboard out here. And you can see when I play it, I am playing it, it's lighting up. So I could also, because I've already got information in here, just have no input and use the input I've got here as MIDI information. And I could send it to the synthesizer I've got here, which just so happens to be this confusingly named on my port 4 here. Okay, and if I play this, hopefully it will play for me, we'll see. It's playing, but you're not hearing anything, right? Because I'm sending it to my synthesizer. My synthesizer out here is actually making noise, but you can't hear it and I can't hear it in Ableton because I actually have to then take the audio from my synthesizer out here and put it back into Ableton. And that's what I've got going on the track below here. So I need to solo that. And hopefully now you'll hear this. And I can play with this. Okay, so because my other camera's not working, you can't see me doing that, but I'll try it again. No, it doesn't like it. And now you've lost me completely. No, I'm back. Yes. But that sound I was playing then was being triggered, the external synthesizer, by this MIDI information, and I was, I can record it back in. So this is kind of, I suppose, kind of often how I kind of operate. I think at this stage, it might be easier for me to show you maybe from scratch how to do this. I'm going to open something else up. Let's see what happens if I open this. No, I won't save that. Okay, great. Okay, so what we're looking at here is, I guess, a bounce of another Ableton session where there's lots of tracks going on. I've done this to try to reduce latency and just, I'll solo this just quickly. Okay, so it's, it's a track in progress. And it's interesting, turn that off. That's here. So I'm going to try to play along with this with an external synthesizer, and yeah, I'm playing one. So what's the best way to do this? Okay, here, MIDI. So I should, maybe I'll do this from scratch. So you know how to make a MIDI track, Shift Command T, make a MIDI track. Here, MIDI from, so it needs to receive information from the external synthesizer. I'm using this thing called a Taria keystep, which is a controller synthesizer. So I select that. Again, you know, it's plugged into the MIDI ports of Ableton, and you know, again, all that information is kept on the preference page under link MIDI, Arturia keystep 32, my controller keyboard. And when I play that, you can see it lights up. But I want to send that information somewhere. I'm sending it to MIDI 2, this port 4, which happens to be the the little Roland external synthesizer I've got. And I'm recording that back in as audio, and it's lighting up in green to the right. So with these two tracks, I essentially kind of playing, and I'm able to record this external synthesizer. That's one way of doing it. Yeah, if I want to actually kind of play along, and I could record this audio track of the external synthesizer. Another way is kind of like I was doing is I can create another MIDI track, and I can actually put in MIDI information, which is what I've done here, a little kind of sequence as a clip. And that MIDI information, I've got to send it somewhere, and I don't need to put MIDI from anywhere because I've got the MIDI information in the clip that I've inputted. But I've got to send that MIDI somewhere, and I want to send it to an external synthesizer. So I've got MIDI 2 here with Ableton, and I'm sending it to, in my case again, port 4, which is this little Roland external JU06 digital synth out here, which, because I can't get the other camera to work, you can't see, but you've got to take my word on it. I think you saw it before. So I'm sending that MIDI information to here, and that's all well and good, but to hear that, I need to take the audio out from the synthesizer and put it back into my audio interface so Ableton can record it, which I've done. Audio from happens to be, my input 35. I've got a lot of kind of audio inputs on my interface set up over to the left here. So I know this is number 35. And so if I play this sequence, and hopefully I'll solo these two. So hopefully that's all we'll hear. So that's a little kind of sequence. I don't know, it's like a four bar loop that I've made into a clip of MIDI information being sent to the external synthesizer, the audio out of the external synthesizer being put back through my audio interface and showing up right alongside here in Ableton. So if I solo those two things and the actual song, hopefully this will work. So wait for the right spot to maybe trigger that clip. So I'm going to pretend that I actually want to, you can hear that in the original kind of audio file. This same line is there, it's in like a road sound, and I'm kind of doubling it here. But it's a little bit behind where I want it, and I'll show you that. I'll actually record some of this in. So I'm soloing it, but if I press record here, and I put record up there, lagging behind where it wants it to be, and I'll show you what I recorded. It's a bit annoying, but this often happens because, you know, Ableton is sending the MIDI information to the synthesizer is sending the audio back into Ableton, I'm recording. By the time I do that loop and get the sound back into Ableton, I've got this kind of classic thing called latency, which is kind of really annoying, which is, you know, and you can see it in the you can see it here. So get rid of these two. So this is what I just recorded. Okay, and if I play this, you should be able to hear it. You know, it's going boop. It's behind the beat. So what I usually do is, and everybody has to do this, you can compensate for the latency, or you can just simply move this stuff and align it where it should fall. I can tell that's a downbeat, and I can see in the audio that I've recorded from the synth that, you know, I'm doing this roughly. Now you can see that these actually fall on the beat. So if I play this, hopefully it will sound better. Yeah, so that's better. Whereas before, because of the latency, you know, this was like sitting about there, and so it was kind of out of time. So this is a big thing when trying to kind of deal with sync or yeah, basically is latency and having the tempo kind of lag behind it. There are ways around it. It's worse because I'm trying to record this information. You know, if I was playing live, so to speak, and not actually recording what I was doing, I'd have less latency. We can kind of live with the latency in a live situation usually, so long as my session isn't too, I haven't got, you know, 80 tracks that I'm playing along with in Ableton, which will kind of start to slow my computer down. I'll have to increase the buffer size, which kind of creates latency as well. You know, as it is, I've got a pretty big buffer size here of 512, which, you know, we notice Ableton tells us the latency kind of going on. And there's a bit here, and you'll watch if I change the number of you know, samples, or if I reduce the buffer size, the latency drops. And that's all well and good, but if you reduce the buffer too much and you're reducing latency, you'll start to get glitching. Because I haven't got a lot of tracks, you may not hear that here. I'll just move this back and play this, we'll see. So that's fine. If I go to 32 samples, we'll probably start to hear latency now, I think. Not that I really want to hear it, but I think we will. Right. There's one little glitch there, I don't know if you heard it, but essentially if I had, you know, a few more tracks here with a buffer that low, with trying to kind of deal with, well, not even external synths, but that makes it worse. I can reduce the latency, but I start to get glitchy, which you don't want, you know, particularly if you're trying to use live in a live sense. So all these sorts of complications, and I'm kind of, you know, rambling about the bush a bit here. That's kind of how I learnt myself to deal with this. Is, you know, you have your Ableton session or Ableton Open. You have a few external things, and the first thing you need to do is work out how to connect them in the capacity you want to, you know, deal with them. You know, are you just, you know, dealing with MIDI information? Is just clock information enough? Can I just use, you know, Ableton Link, for example, or do I have to use MIDI? If I want to use MIDI, do I actually want to record what I'm doing externally? And if I do, well, then I need an audio interface, and I need to kind of go back into Ableton. Then all of a sudden, you're starting to kind of get this loop, which can easily lead to latency. Of course, in a live performance, you know, it's risky. You know, it's risky to kind of record, you know, to have a bunch of loops or tracks in Ableton to do stuff in real time with hardware, and to actually record that in the same session starts to put a lot of pressure, CPU pressure on your machine, and, you know, you should try to avoid that, or use somebody else's computer to actually record what you're doing. You know, live, usually you just, you know, the main medium is performance, so you just want things to kind of work and not to have any kind of glitching. But look, the moment you do have, you know, you're syncing things with external machines, you start to put more stress, I guess, on your machine. So basic MIDI, in terms of just triggering external things, isn't too bad. But the moment you start to try to record that back in, audio takes up a lot more kind of processing power. So depends how you kind of want to kind of use this stuff. But essentially, yeah, you just kind of play around with, if you're just doing MIDI like we've done here, you just got to kind of make a MIDI track. You know, I'm kind of doing it again here, and up comes this in Ableton, and, you know, where's my MIDI coming from, my information? Is it coming from an external keyboard, or am I actually going to kind of input some MIDI information, you know, into a sequence? And you can see Ableton gives us this keyboard here. I'm just, you know, randomly inputting notes all over the place here as a clip. And I'm going to take these off solo. And so that's information with an Ableton. If I want to send that externally, I've got to kind of go down here and go, where am I sending this? Where's this MIDI going to? At the moment, it's not going anywhere, which is fine if you want to pull up an internal synth within Ableton and drop it on that track. It will play the MIDI information. But if I want to send it outside of Ableton, MIDI 2, I've got to have, I guess, you know, it could be a USB MIDI cable kind of plugged in, going to an external synth. And it depends what your external synth allows you to do. Some external synths, you know, just have USB MIDI, and they'll pick up that information and recognize, and that synth will then be recognized within Ableton. Older USB, or not USB, older synths won't have USB. They'll have like a 5-pin, I'll pull this out of the little synth here, you know, this thing, which you probably can't see, you know, the 5-pin MIDI, in which case you'll need some sort of little MIDI interface. Some audio interfaces have that built in. But yeah, a lot of kind of newer external synths have USB MIDI, in which case you can just take USB out of your computer, plug it into your external synth, and then that synth should show up as an option here within Ableton. Ableton should recognize it. And again, because I know I've just pulled that out now, so it's probably not going to work. Put it back in. Something's probably going to crash in a minute. So if I send this MIDI to this port 4, which again, I know is what this synth here is attached to, this clip information here is being sent to that external synth. And look, I could plug that external synth into a speaker or something here and it would play it. But it's amplifying it, which would be a good solution if you're doing this live into a mixer or something rather than going back into Ableton. But for you to hear it because you're coming through Zoom, I have to kind of create this audio track and actually take the output of this external synth and put it back into Ableton for you to hear. So that's what I'm going to do here. So MIDI from, where's this? Well, I don't want a MIDI track, I want an audio track. So it's just audio, okay? Audio from, and it's external in. I know I'm connected to my external in, which is 35. And in solo, let's see what happens. If I trigger this clip, nothing. Okay. Probably because I unplugged it, which I shouldn't have done. Press record, try again. No, that's essentially what I was doing before over here on the left when I had that little clip done here and it was triggering the synth. So that's basically how you can use kind of MIDI to, I guess, either trigger external synths, and again, kind of a lot of the USB external synths will, and I've got a couple others over here, which I wish my other camera was working, and like this Mode Grandmother will take a USB MIDI and I could plug that straight in and it will get the clock information if Ableton's master clock, and here it is at 90. It'll get the pitch information if I send it to it. That's, I suppose it's a tried and tested way of dealing with, MIDI information and external hardware. But there are those other ways that I mentioned, CV tools and Ableton Link, which is just sync information. But it's been hard enough to try to make this work and have cameras respond. Are there any questions? I'm conscious I've kind of been, might be a lot of kind of questions.
I've written down like 5 questions.
Yeah.
So my first one is, you had like is it like a MIDI to CV converter? Is that what you've got for your?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
And when you send MIDI data to that, is it essentially the same process? Like you can write in the notes and just the exact same thing?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, and I can send, I suppose I've just been talking about clock or tempo MIDI information and pitch information in terms of what I've showed you, but there's other kinds of MIDI information we can also send, control change and velocity information and stuff like that.
So for that kick drum you sent, was that just like a note on off information on the coordinates? Is that how you did it?
Yeah, it would just be sending it's not even that. I was just sending it clock information, which is like a gate, a trigger on and trigger off.
Okay.
Yeah. On every kind of pulse. That's all I was sending to get that kick, and that's all I need for that kick. And it'll kind of turn it into audio with an analog kick, and I was just recording that back in. Yeah.
So there's an entire new sort of system to learn if you're going to bridge those two.
If you're using Eurorack, which is kind of running on control voltage, you've got to convert the digital information, which is the MIDI, which is the stuff in Ableton, is all digital, right? And you've got to convert that to control voltage, which is electricity.
Yeah.
At a very small amount, which is how kind of analog-based stuff works. It's not zeros and ones. You've got to convert the zeros and ones. And what's a note on in MIDI? I don't know. whatever that value is between 0 and 127.
Yeah.
The little MIDI interface that I had for my, converter will convert that to control voltage, and it'll be, control voltage on will be, I don't know, probably 8 volts. Control voltage off will be 0 volts. And it just converts those numbers, those MIDI numbers, to voltage, and it sends that, literally that voltage through the wires to the module that makes the kick. Yeah. So, but that's if you're working in the land of, I guess, Eurorack or control voltage. There's so many external synths that are often kind of digital as well, or analog, like the Moog grandmother. That's the booklet here, but the grandmother here, it's an analog synth, but it'll take digital information and you just USB MIDI out and convert that to analog clock information. Yeah. So so it depends on what the external gear is, what you're trying to kind of sync up or make work with Ableton. Yeah. That kind of determines, the best way to kind of send the external, what means you should use to kind of either sync it or send it information.
Okay.
But the most established, of course, is MIDI, which is why, or partly why I was, mostly dealing with MIDI tonight, and also because I'm kind of struggling with cameras and the technology over Zoom.
That's all right. I've got some MIDI questions as well. That's all right. So firstly, can MIDI cables send multiple channels of MIDI at once? It can send like 100 or whatever?
Not 100, usually 16 channels of MIDI. Yeah.
So you could have like 16 different patterns going through your cable and then split them to different devices or something? Is that how
Totally.
it works? Totally. Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And is
and
it
not only that, not only that, but well, you can have multiple channels, but each channel has 16 different. I could send one channel to 16 different trigger 16 different things. So MIDI is quite powerful still, even though it was kind of an old protocol. So and there's new kinds of MIDI coming as well, like MIDI Mark II is kind of coming.
Oh, right.
It's a whole lot, But the basic stuff will remain there, but there'll be other expressive-based stuff, more stuff you can do with MIDI kind of coming. It's already kind of available, some synths and things like that. But essentially, you could have, a range of, you could have 20 synths out here. I mean, I haven't got quite that many, but I'm probably getting close. Sometimes I get multiple things going, but you can, you just send them on the information on a different kind of channel. Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
And you just make sure that synth is receiving that channel. And so like sometimes you can split out the channel into kind of MIDI breakout stuff to do multiple things. Again, it kind of depends what sort of MIDI that your machines are receiving. If you've got a digital synth, kind of new ones also do, there's a thing called virtual MIDI, which will kind of use wireless to kind of send this information as well. So a lot of kind of iPad based or tablet based applications, and there are some really powerful ones now. You can send whether it's clock or pitch information backwards and forwards to Ableton via virtual MIDI, and it's doing it wirelessly. And again, they're not. It's not a lot of information. It's not like audio, where audio is what kind of starts to slow down our machines even still, despite leaps in processor speed. But MIDI doesn't take much CPU power. It's better where you can to send things via wires. It kind of works better. Wi-Fi's drop out. Other people can kind of crash the network and things like that. But it's certainly possible. And that's really kind of how Ableton Link works, which I haven't had a chance to get to tonight. But it sends just clock information, and great for kind of jamming with other people and keeping things synced together. And you can see, I think I'm still showing my screen here at the top left, there's this little thing called Link, which I can turn on And if other people turn that on and we're connected to the same wireless network, you can all share the same tempo. And if somebody changes their tempo on their machine, everybody else's tempo will slave to it. It's kind of an interesting concept, but it doesn't send, you know, the pitch information like I was showing you tonight. So if you've got any other questions, sorry, I'm starting to kind of talk.
I had one more before I allow someone else to
Open the
talk.
floor, yeah.
Just around, if you're using multiple MIDI devices, is there a benefit to using like like splitting your MIDI out versus like using the MIDI through?
Yep.
From one device to another, like daisy chaining it, I guess? Yeah.
I've got down the back a little MIDI through box, which takes one MIDI out and splits it into 4. Which kind of has worked for me. I hear though, if you try to split it more than that, you'll start to get the MIDI information will start to, you know, degrade a bit, and you'll get timing or problems if you're trying to split it out too much. So what I do is, and you saw it before, I'll bring it up again. I go to preferences, and all the MIDI stuff in Ableton is here. I've got another kind of dedicated MIDI interface that gives me 5 independent MIDI ins and outs. Just so I don't have to worry about if I'm doing things with more than 4 independent channels. Well, that's still the one channel split into kind of 4 different machines. I can do that, but if I want to kind of like keep things a bit tidier, it's just easier for me to use a dedicated MIDI interface. Yeah. But, you know, I mean, again, it depends what and how many things you're trying to kind of sync or bring into Ableton. If you're, you know, the most basic thing is, oh, I've got 1 or 2 synths sitting here. Okay, do they take a USB in as a MIDI cable? If they do, that's really easy. I don't even have to worry about a MIDI interface. I just plug a USB cable into it, and it will, Ableton will pick it up, and that's great. If your external stuff only has that 5-pin MIDI, then you'll need some sort of MIDI interface. You can get a 1-in, 2-out kind of thing for, I don't know, $80, I guess. This fancy 5-in, 5-out one that I've got, I don't know, that probably cost me a couple $100, but yeah, it's pretty versatile.
I've got just like a USB cable that has a little, you know, it's like $5 on eBay or something, and then a MIDI in and out on the other end, and that seems to work pretty well.
Oh, great. Yeah. But yeah, you know, it's a little bit confusing, or probably a lot confusing initially, the world of MIDI, and, you know, I've kind of, fumbled my way through it over the years, and I can do enough to do with it what I need to do. And when I get stuck, you know, I do what we all do, is I jump on a forum or YouTube, and there's usually some 16-year-old telling me how to do it. In Japan or somewhere, and in America, going, you know, what's up, dude? And then gives me a kind of an explanation. Any other questions? Well, you know, I don't know what time we go to normally here, but I'm happy to take a couple more questions if there are any.
If you, I guess, if playing live, would you try to bring your synths in through Ableton to play, or would you use the MIDI to play your synths through their own hardware?
Yeah, that's great. There are pros and cons. I mean, I could have a bunch of, you know, clips in Ableton with MIDI information. You know, here's one here, you know, and the first question would be, well, why don't I just capture that as audio? And, you know, that way I'm not relying on sending stuff out and then sending that audio somewhere. That's if I'm happy with preset audio, but I might want to interact with the synthesizer live, in which case I could send it this MIDI information, so I don't have to worry about playing that information live. And I might want to just kind of play the filter or something on the synth and play with the color of the sound. So it depends what you want to do, I guess. Both are options, and I guess, again, overall, you're just watching all the time how many tracks am I relying on Ableton to do? What happens if my computer crashes? You know, one bit of advice that was given to me once was, you can see my CPU over here. You know, it's hovering at rest, pretty much at around 15–16%. Was, you know, make sure your CPU, if you're playing live, doesn't get over 20%. The moment you get to about 40 or 50% in Ableton of CPU usage, you'll start to get glitching and issues, which you don't want live. So yeah, getting back to, if you're preparing a set for live and trying to work out, you know, what should be MIDI, what should be audio, how many tracks have I got? It's kind of a unique equation. You've got to kind of have almost like a discussion with your CPU, and just make sure it's not getting too high, because you don't want to, it's trying to minimize the risk. And if it's a live situation, I think another good question to ask, especially when you're trying to kind of combine these worlds in the box and outside the box, is, you know, what's an acceptable level of risk? But what happens if Ableton decides to crash? Which, you know, can happen. You know, what happens if I'm halfway through a set or a song or whatever it is? Can I keep going? You know, which is a good reason to have some things with an external synth, and being able to kind of keep things going, or one reason to have your clock or main master information coming from a hardware synth, because they're or a drum machine or something like that, because they are invariably more reliable than a computer, which, you know, who knows? I mean, maybe you've picked up something on the internet, a bug or something in a computer, and all of a sudden, I know it's happened to Amy before, playing live in an album launch once, because I was there, and she had kind of a few computer issues and got through it, but it's stressful. So some people have like...
It happened to me in Berlin, actually.
Did it?
Yeah, like I was there for a gig. The morning of the gig,
Yeah.
like the user thing, like shut down. It was
it's awful, isn't it?
Oh,
yeah.
Like, what? It's just the timing of it. But,
yeah. It's tricky. So I think, but there are ways. Well, I guess the only true way around it is to have something outside Ableton that is controlling, I guess, is your master. So, and to have one or two external things, it could be a sequencer or a drum machine, or a couple of things that can keep everything going enough, so that if that happens, that's what some people do. You'll see some people like use things like Electron octatracks and things like that, which is kind of like Ableton in an external. It looks totally different, but it's kind of like, it does kind of a lot of the stuff Ableton will do in an external hardware thing. And like someone like David, who was here in this last time, often uses an octatrack live as his kind of master. You know, he's just kind of, he doesn't use Ableton at all. He just likes kind of external stuff because it works. The reliability is a lot higher and it's a lot more tactile. We can still have a tactile relationship with Ableton with, external controllers and hardware and, but I think you've got to kind of look at your own equation and work out, what's the risk factor. Look, having said all that, operating systems and Ableton and all these things are a lot more reliable than they used to be. If we went back 10 years or even 15 years, operating systems, Ableton in its very infancy and all other doors in their infancy, kind of really unreliable. It would crash all the time. So it's quite more reliable. You could take the Björk approach, which is, I remember kind of seeing her kind of documentary on her album Vespertine, which is, she performed in opera houses and stuff like that. And she had a lot of kind of tech alongside, a lot of kind of, acoustic instruments. And she had the electronic duo, Matt Moss, working with her, who were taking care of all the kind of sample stuff and all the clock information and all the syncage between the live performance and all the electronic stuff. And they were saying, oh, there was, you know, one show we did, you know, in this opera house somewhere, and their computers crashed, you know, and there's thousands of people out there, and they said they were freaking out trying to restart their machines. Meanwhile, Björk is loving it, just kind of going with, this unexpected twist, and just, you can take that approach, but it's, you got to kind of, either be able to adapt totally quickly, or just kind of be that personality where you can just go, okay, this is great, I'm going to do this. It probably helps to have, thousands of people out there who probably don't care what you do, as long as it's, which is her case. But in our case, people are going to go, oh, something's wrong. And yeah, I don't want to kind of talk you out of this. It's a really interesting world where, we can do so much in Ableton, but there's still, kind of tactile things, I guess, we can do with external synthesizers and drum machines that, it's just so much more pleasurable to be able to do that, but also have the power that comes with Ableton that can do so many things so well, whether it's playing live or at some stage, if you actually kind of want to record what you're doing and then actually kind of produce and work up, the live or external stuff, you've got to get it into the box in some way. You're not going to kind of, or maybe you are, but you're probably not going to use external tape machines. You're going to get it into Ableton and then kind of work all these sounds. But I think that the starting point is kind of working out what works for you in terms of your external stuff and what you've got. How can I create easy sync between my Ableton and my external stuff? And beyond that, how can I get them talking to each other? And MIDI is still kind of probably the best way to do that. Yeah. How are we going, Ames? Do we need to... I
think we need to go final question now, because I know that you could just keep going.
Yeah, I just talk about this stuff all night. But...
screen off, because it's really super pixelated, so people might want to see.
Okay. See, stop share. How's that?
Nice one.
A bit less pixelated.
Yeah.
Nice. I can see, you can even see the stuff over here better now.
So does anyone want to take us out with a final question? Anyone got a burning question that they want answered? Otherwise,
there's a couple of things in the chat. Multiple computers running link to introduce redundancy. That's a good question. What do you mean by redundancy? Do you mean latency, or is that John? Is John still here?
Yeah, he is. Yep.
Crashes. Car crashes. Crashes. I guess maybe the question is...
CPU overload there, I think, is what John's referring to. Is that, when you've got so much going and you're reaching that kind of 50-60% CPU load, will going to multiple computers running link help that?
Probably, because link's great. There are pros and cons to it, and it's a whole, I guess, kind of session in itself, which I'm happy to kind of do at another stage, if you like, if I work out how to be on Wi-Fi and with Zoom at the same time as showing you how that works. But yeah, link, yeah, I'll have to think that through, but it's a great thing you can easily explore. But all it does, though, it doesn't allow you to kind of send all this other MIDI information, like pitch information, or here's a sequence in Ableton and I want it to play on this synthesizer, or here's a drum pattern and I want to send it to a drum machine. It won't do that. All it will send is clock or tempo information between machines. And so that actually doesn't take much CPU at all. So certainly if that's all you want to do, then it's not going to use much CPU at all. But if that's all you want to do, maybe there are ways to do that with MIDI, for example, which also won't take up much CPU at all, which also, might be more reliable. There are a few issues with link in terms of if you want to use Ableton Link for live performance, and you want to kind of connect all your machines if they allow you to connect via link. And a lot of kind of new things will, like tablets and applications like that, not old stuff. I guess there are pros and cons. You know, other people can crash your link network and stuff like that. And if you're not careful, it's better to kind of use wires if you can. Yes, maybe a beginner's modular workshop too. Can we get a glitch microsound workshop in the future? Yes. Very happy to kind of talk about that. I'm just seeing all these kind of questions here now. Can you trigger tracks from master to other slave? Yep, of course. Yep. And look, probably a session, again, related to this, to do with MIDI controllers, where you trigger, stuff in Ableton and do other sorts of manipulation would be really useful for some people perhaps as well, because it gives you, you can get away from the computer and kind of, particularly if you're using it live, like hide it under a table or something, so it's not in your way, and actually play a MIDI controller with knobs and faders and buttons, and that's either triggering or manipulating. Essentially, it's just MIDI information, and you've mapped stuff in Ableton to it. And again, that doesn't take much CPU at all. So if your Ableton is going to crash in that scenario, it's probably not the controller making it crash. It might be because you've got too many tracks or some random plugin that you've downloaded from somewhere that's decided that it doesn't want to kind of operate. That's probably what's going to cause your crash. But basic MIDI, whether it's controllers or the stuff I've been showing you tonight in terms of triggering or playing external synthesizers, doesn't take a lot of CPU. It's the recording or getting that information as audio, not MIDI, back into Ableton that starts to put, depending on how many tracks you've got going, starts to build in latency, that time lag because of the audio, and it also starts to kind of put more pressure on the CPU. But just basic MIDI stuff is pretty CPU friendly. Processing latency. There's a lot of kind of latency things popping up now.
Part 2.
Sorry?
We might need to do an Anthony Lyons part 2, I reckon.
Yes, sorry. Yeah, they're kind of good questions. And look, hopefully, at some point, I know this is because we're all kind of spread in different places, but yeah, some of this stuff is best done the old-fashioned way, around a table or something, where you can kind of see. It's much easier to show inputs and outputs and to get it in your head. Apologies, it's quite hard to kind of show all this with cameras, but hopefully it's helped a little bit.
That's where we're moving to post, like as things start to open up. Obviously, we're going to throw in, it's not always going to be online. We're going to do in face-to-face workshops and that kind of thing.
Yeah, when I can leave Melbourne, maybe I can come.
Yes. Can exit Melbourne. So we'll be definitely doing some live ones, and I'll try and move it around around the hood, so it won't be just Castlemaine or Newstead or wherever. Move it around. Probably not Melbourne based though, but so we'll be able to actually grab some stuff and do things in real life, which will just blow everyone's mind. Won't it?
Be lovely. Yeah, I mean, I'd love to explore some of these questions to do with what ways you can deal with kind of glitch or microsound, as well as the modular stuff. Didn't even get to the booklet easel here, unfortunately.
Yeah. But that needs a lesson on its own. But we will, I mean, if you have any questions too that come up when you're thinking about things later, just pop them onto the group. And if I can't answer them, I'll get Anth to jump into and answer them as well. So between us, we got you covered. So but thanks, Anth. That's awesome.
Oh, thanks everyone. Thanks for listening, and thanks for bearing with camera failure and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's awesome.
Take care. See ya.
We'll see you all next month. But yeah, jump on the group and ask any questions, and any videos that you find that might help with what Anth was talking about tonight, or anything like that, when you go and explore it in your own way, and we'll chuck them up and talk about it. It'd be awesome.
There's some great videos out there, and yeah, kind of easier to explain some of these concepts in a pre-record video than trying to do this live through the Zoom at the same time as trying to get everything to work is a bit problematic. But there's some great videos out there, so I reckon that's a great idea. If people have some links to stuff.